Hey everyone, this is Turd, Flinging Monkey, and we're going to continue our talk about the political trichotomy. And I want to address one criticism I hear a lot from the absolutist right, and that is that America failed. So republicanism failed, and democracy obviously failed, and so because all these systems eventually fail and inch us closer to communism, the only true answer is absolutism. Whether it's a monarch, a dictator, a fascist, something, because it's the opposite of democracy. So let me break down the argument, let me explain why it's wrong, and let me explain the actual way forward. So the United States of America was founded as a Republican government. The word democracy does not appear in the U.S. Constitution, nor in any of the constitutions of the 50 states. And in the Federalist Papers, the Founding Fathers did everything they could to avoid a democracy. There's all kinds of quotes. I referenced them in a previous video. Also, the vote was restricted to landowners. Landowners were the taxpayers of that time because there was no such thing as an income tax. Now, the United States of America transitioned from a republic to a democracy once we had universal suffrage. I know we're technically, legally still a republic, in the same way China is the Republic of China. I mean, you can call yourself a republic, it doesn't make you a republic. Once you have universal suffrage, you're a democracy. By definition, democracy is majority rule. Once everyone votes, you have majority rule. When you restrict the franchise, you do not have majority rule. You know, like if you have a dictatorship or an oligarchy, and there's like an inner circle, if that inner circle has little votes among themselves, it doesn't make their system a democracy. Now the argument goes, even though the Founding Fathers didn't want a democracy, it eventually became a democracy, and thus the American system, republicanism, failed. And since democracy devolves into mob rule, and then as some kind of oligarchy takes place once the chaos settles down, it proves that republicanism is a dead end. Because it failed, it becomes democracy after a while, and then that democracy becomes communism or something after a while. Thus, the only true answer is some kind of absolutist government. But the problem with this argument is absolutist governments also fail. Every system of government has flaws. Generally, absolutist governments are overthrown by the people, while democratic governments become mob rule idiocracies. And so I described this in previous videos as this pendulum. You have a corrupt ruling class, and then you have an idiocracy. And it just swings back and forth between one or the other. If you have a dictator, a king, a czar, any kind of absolutist government, and it's overthrown by the people themselves because they're tired of, the bullshit of the monarch, and then they create a different system, usually a democratic system or a republic, exactly what happened in the United States, that could be seen as absolutism failing. So if absolutism inevitably results in the rebellion of the people, and then they establish a different kind of government, it's the same thing. So any argument you can level against republicanism descending into democracy can be leveled against absolutism. Now, it's true that absolutism has to be overthrown with violence, whereas republicanism can be overthrown through legislative reform, which is exactly what happened. There was no Second American Revolution where the commies rose up and seized power and had a revolution. I mean, they wanted to, don't get me wrong. They would have loved to have that. But instead, they didn't have to. They just changed the electorate. They expanded the suffrage, and once they had the majority of the people on their side, they just slowly pushed the government to the left, and there was no need for a revolution. The point is, you have to appreciate the fact that nothing is static. You could institute the objectively best system possible, but because it will have some flaws, no system's perfect, people will seek to fix those problems and then create more problems until the entire system breaks down. It's simply human nature. So the problem with republicanism is that the seed of democracy is planted in it. And eventually, whatever factions that favor democracy, they'll eventually have their day. And once you have a democracy, you can't undo it. It only takes one generation to give the franchise to everyone. Once everyone has the franchise, you can't take it away because they'll never vote away their right to vote. So you're stuck with a democracy from that point forward. So, republicanism works until it doesn't. And then it just becomes a democracy, and then you can't fix it, and then the slow death begins. The problem with absolutism is the ruling class becomes more and more corrupt until they're overthrown and killed. And then the system gets radically reformed. So it's like with republicanism to democracy, you have a slow, gradual death. With absolutism to, anything, communism, anything, you have a revolution. And you have a very quick, violent death. See, the advantage of an absolutist system is you completely cut democracy out. You say only these people's voices matter, the rest you can go fuck off. Now that sounds good in theory because you're cutting off all the riffraff. They can no longer have a voice in the government. The problem is those people become very resentful if they're being mistreated. So, most people don't vote. Most people don't care about politics until it affects them. Then they care about politics. So if you take care of people, they don't necessarily care if they're voting or not, as long as their needs are being taken care of. But if you aren't taking care of their needs, then they get pissed off. And the fact that they don't have a voice in the government and they have no way of, trying to reform the government, as JFK famously said, those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. And that's exactly what you see. So with social mobility, you allow people to become part of this upper class that can vote. Now, my proposed system, responsibilitism, you have net taxpayers voting for Congress, you have veterans voting for the president, and then the Senate is appointed by, the little groups that make up the nation, and they can appoint them however they want. The point is, though, there's a clear path if you want to vote. If you are a net taxpayer, if you pay more into the system than you take out, then you can vote. It's as simple as that. If you serve your country with, honorably discharge and whatnot in a war, or if you're simply sign up for the draft and maintain the standard that you can be called up if needed, then you can vote for the president. These are sacrifices that you yourself can make. And if you're poor and low income and you really want to vote, just don't take welfare. Don't accept government services. And then you'll be able to be a net taxpayer, if it means that much to you. But if you need these government services to survive because you're very poor, then just take the money and shut up. Now, eventually, no matter how much this system makes sense to me, people will say, no, I want free stuff and I want to vote, or I'm going to turn to violence, and we have the numbers, the people, viva la revolution. And unless those people can be killed, they're going to take over. And then you're going to have, again, the democracy, essentially, which is the problem. So with absolutism, if you have social mobility, eventually that absolutist system becomes a republic, which eventually becomes a democracy, which eventually either becomes a communist dictatorship or it just collapses. It ends poorly. Democracies never last long. They soon waste, exhaust, and murder themselves, as one of the founding fathers famously said. But the alternative of denying social mobility is you will have a revolution. People will overthrow the government. And then you have a very quick transition from perhaps, an absolutist government to a communist government with no foreplay. You just go from an absolutist government like a king straight to communism. And that's no bueno. So that's kind of what I'm talking about here. No system's perfect. No system will last forever. Every system, quote unquote, fails. Anyone saying that their system won't fail is retarded. Every system has failed. Kings have been overthrown. Dictators have been assassinated. Fascist governments have been overthrown. That's the nature of basically governments. If you don't have a system where people have social mobility, they're going to overthrow you eventually. And if you give them social mobility, they'll eventually fight for democracy because free shit, and then the system collapses anyway. Human nature is always fluid. Nothing lasts forever. Just accept it. At least until we have robot armies. Then we could just grease them. But we don't have robot armies right now. So, Anyway, this is Turd Flinging Monkey. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.